Hello everybody. Welcome to chapter 8 and our first brief lecture. Our chapter is dedicated to the planning process, and this is obviously the first step, the first phase in the management process. So in this chapter we're going to look at why managers plan, the benefit of planning, the relationship as well of planning to the other three functions in the management process, and how in fact managers go about planning, the stages or the steps in the planning process. That's what we're going to focus on in this first brief lecture. So let's begin. Well, it says here that planning is the process of setting objectives and determining how to accomplish them. We mentioned that before when we looked at the management process in chapter 1. Planning is all about having goals and deciding how, in fact, you will achieve those goals. Objectives and goals, these are the specific results or outcome that one intends to achieve. It can be for your personal life, for example, graduating from university, or getting a job, or getting married. That is a specific objective. For your professional or for an organization's professional well-being, it might be a certain profit level, it might be a certain growth, or it might be in terms of reducing cost. Each one of those are objectives or goals that either yourself or the organization will like to fulfill. And in order to fulfill those objectives or goals, in order to meet them, you will create and devise a plan. And a plan, as it says here, is a statement of action steps to be taken in order to accomplish the objectives. What do I need to do in order to make my goal a reality? If it is a case of attempting to graduate from university, let's say in the next 2 years, what types of steps, what will you have to do in order to achieve that? Well, you will have to take certain classes, you will have to make certain grades, you will have to perhaps not do work or not participate in some work that you might be doing right now. All of those will be part of a plan in order for you to achieve your objective. What about if you wanted to open your own business in the next couple of years? There are things that you'll have to do as well. You'll have to come up with an idea. You might have to get funding. You might have to start looking for a location. All of those things are steps that you will do, actions that you will take in order to realize that objective. But regardless of what the plan is, or why the plan is being created, or what setting the plan is being created for, all planning involves 1, objectives and goals, and 2, approaches or methods in which those goals will be achieved. This is the steps in the planning process, and it's very, very similar to what you will see when we discuss the decision-making process. The decision-making process that was discussed in chapter 7. Now, we didn't do chapter 7, but if you look at in your text, in information and decision-making, you will see that the decision-making process is very similar to the planning process. And in the planning process, you first define your objectives, meaning that you identify what goals do you want to accomplish. You next determine where you stand relative to those objectives. That means that you look at yourself, what you have accomplished already, and what you still need to do in order to meet your objectives. You're also concerning yourself at this stage with what you are good at, meaning your internal strengths, what is going to help you to meet your objectives. And also you're going to look at internal obstacles, things within you that are perhaps going to limit or hurt your ability to meet those objectives. And those are called weaknesses. So once you've identified your goal, you next look at yourself and look at where you are relative to your goals. Once you look at yourself, you may also then want to look at the environment. We've spoken a lot in this class already about the importance importance of the environment. In the environment, you can get premises for future conditions, meaning what in the environment is going to allow you to be successful in the future, and also what in the environment is perhaps going to become an obstacle to your future success. And that can also help you in terms of planning for future developments, planning for scenarios that might occur. Once you have looked at yourself internally as well as looked at externally, you will then analyze alternatives, determine what types of steps you can potentially take, and evaluate those steps, and then determine what your plan of action for yourself will be. Once you do that, you will implement the plan and evaluate the results. So those are the steps in the planning process. Again, 1, defining your objectives. 2, determining where you stand relative to those objectives. 3, premises or developing premises regarding what is going to happen in the external environment in the future. 4, looking at the alternatives that are available to you and determining or choosing one to make a plan. And then lastly, implementing your plan and evaluating your results. I want you to go through this planning process with a specific plan in your life. Perhaps an easy one would be graduating university. That is in fact your objective. And then what you can do secondly is to look at yourself and look at what you've accomplished thus far. Perhaps how many classes you have taken towards that endeavor, what your GPA is, and therefore what is going to help you internally in order to be able to graduate in the next couple of years or in the next year. What do you do well that is going to help you? Perhaps you are great in terms of studying, you are dedicated or disciplined, or perhaps some other types of weaknesses. It could be simply the lack of financial resources. Also then look at the future conditions and see whether there are opportunities that are going to be available to you that are going to make your graduation possible in the next year, and also perhaps things that are going to hurt you. For example, you may need certain classes that are not available at Xavier University. And if those classes are available and you can't take them at other universities, that will be an opportunity. But at Xavier University, there might be opportunities that you can have that can allow you to graduate early. For example, what you're doing right now, taking online classes in the summer. And then you devise a plan. What do you need to do in order to graduate? How many classes you need to take? What type of classes you're going to need to take? Types of or the GPAs that you may have to maintain. And then once you have your plan, what do you need to do? What type of hours you need to spend? What type of work you need to accomplish? You implement that plan, and hopefully we can see the results that you are graduating on time. We also said that planning, although it is an independent and individual part of the management process, means that it stands alone. It has some relationship, of course, to the other three. And I mentioned in chapter 1 the Frankenstein example, if you remember. And I said the first role or the first thing that Dr. Frankenstein did was he devised what Igor would look like and what he would be. That was the planning. And once he did that, once he created an approach, once he devised an approach and had an objective, he then built a structure that can carry out the plan, and that can therefore fulfill the objective. Planning therefore leads right into organization, which is creating structures. So I have the idea in my mind, I essentially know what I want to do, and I know how I want to do it. In order to then have it done, I many times create structures to afford me the ability to realize my plan. Think of it in terms of a business that has an idea. Nike, let's say, has an idea for a new shoe. They have a objective. This is what we want the shoe to look like. This is what we want the shoe to do. And therefore, they will then create a structure. They will create perhaps a prototype that will demonstrate the functions of the shoe that they plan and hopefully realize the objectives that they have for the shoe. Similarly, in a business, once you have once you have devised an idea for what you want your business to be, let's say some of you have stated that you wanted to perhaps start your own business. Well, the beginning stages, of course, planning, determining what you're going to do, right? Why you're going to do it. And then obviously having a strategy that we're going to talk a little more in chapter 10 about. Having a strategy as how am I going to do? Let's say your idea is to open up a restaurant, and then you have a plan as to how you're going to do that, what your restaurant is going to look like, what it is going to serve, where perhaps it is going to be. Your next step is to actually organize, to create that structure, to get the people, to get the location, to get the machinery, to put the marketing efforts together, and to actually build that restaurant with all the parts that are necessary. You're not going to know about the parts or what parts you need or how those parts perhaps function together unless you plan. Now, without planning, you could perhaps try to do it kind of on the fly, but you're likely to run into a lot of problems. Again, the old adage is if you fail to plan, you will plan to fail. Planning allows you, as you will see, to have some specificity in terms of your design, in terms of your organization. So once you organize, then we can lead and get into controlling. So it feeds into that management process. Some of the benefits of planning. The first one is that it improves focus and flexibility. And before I begin with these four, let me just say again, there are distinct benefits to planning. It can sometimes cost, it can sometimes require us to spend a lot of time before we actually begin doing anything. And that's why sometimes people are concerned and unwilling to plan because they see it as somewhat of a wasteful endeavor. We're not actually doing anything. We're kind of just sitting around and coming up with ideas and really trying to hammer out what we will do, but we aren't really doing anything. And that can be true if we plan too much, if we spend too much time in trying to figure out how we're actually going to graduate. We may not actually graduate. If we spend too much time trying to think about how we're going to bring our business idea to reality, we may never actually have a business. So there is some truth to the whole premise of paralysis by analysis. However, if we do not spend the time planning, if we do not spend the time really identifying what we want to achieve and how best we're going to achieve it, we can find ourselves getting into problems that we should have considered and taken into consideration before we've actually tried to implement. Because once we have attempted to implement, we cannot necessarily stop or we cannot necessarily change without it being very costly and sometimes very time consuming. So it's better a lot of times to think about the problems or think about the opportunities beforehand. Remember, going back to the planning process, in that we can look at where number two and number three, looking at ourselves relative to the objective and looking at the external environment, looking at future conditions. Well, those things help us to consider beforehand some of the eventualities that will occur. You don't want to get into something and then realize, oh wait, you know what? I don't really have the strength, so I don't have the abilities to do these things. Or you don't want to start a process and then realize or recognize that there is no market for it, perhaps. There is no opportunity in the environment. That happens a lot when people try to start their own business. They believe that it is going to be successful and they do not look at the environment today and necessarily in the future, and they start businesses and then realize this isn't going to work. Well, if they had taken the time to analyze future conditions and analyze what's likely to occur in the environment in later years, they would have probably changed or adapted their plan or dropped their plan altogether or chosen an alternative plan. So that is the case. And that's also important as you pick your majors and you pick your area of expertise, to not only consider what is going on today, but what is likely to occur in the future in terms of the environment, and choose the alternative that best meets that. So that's really important. Let's not think of planning as a waste of time. There are distinct benefits, and we're going to look at 4 of these benefits. The first one it says is planning improves our focus and our flexibility. Proves our focus and our flexibility. As we said before, planning helps us to be more specific. Oftentimes, you recognize when someone does not have a plan. They seem to have little or no focus about what they're doing. They seem to kind of be wavering and not necessarily staying upon a specific path. What planning does is that it gives us direction and it gives us guidance. We know what to do. Think about when you put something into a GPS. When you put something into a GPS, essentially what you've done is that the GPS has calculated for you a plan, a set of actions that is going to allow you to get to your final destination. It knows exactly where you need to turn, how long you need to drive in certain places. That gives you a direction and guidance. So that plan gives you focus. Okay? Many times when people are wavering, it is because they don't have a plan. And conversely, when people are continue to be committed to something, it's because they have a plan in which to follow. And so that's the benefit of planning. It keeps you focus. Stick with the plan. You'll hear coaches say that. You'll hear business managers say that. The reason why we are doing this is because it is part of our plan, and all our efforts are going to be connected and directed by that plan. And if something were to occur, or we had an idea and it did not fit into the plan, we would have to some extent, disregard it. But saying that, we must also recognize that planning allows us not only to best be directed and guided or focused, but it also allows us to be flexible. Flexibility is a good or a very important part or facet of effective planning. Let's use again the GPS example. What were to happen if you were to steer off course, if you were to move away from the designated plan? Well, you would see that the GPS would recalculate. And what it's doing there, it is being flexible. In essence, there are alternative approaches to, in many cases, to your final destination. And what the GPS therefore accounts for are those different approaches, and it accommodates flexibility. Plans allow us to be flexible. We have a roadmap, if you will. We have a blueprint to start with. But if things either in ourselves or in the environment should change, we can adapt. And that's why it's always good when you're planning to allow for flexibility. Your plan cannot be rigid or so rigid that if something were to happen, you could not fulfill your plan. You have to account for changes, as we said, in the environment, but also changes in yourself. So your plan has to allow you to be focused, but should still accommodate some flexibility. And that's a benefit of planning. We have something to begin with, and then we can adapt. Secondly, planning gives you action orientation. But what do we mean by action orientation? Well, when you have a plan, again, not only does it make you focused and committed, but it also drives and motivates you. You want to fulfill the plan because you believe that the plan will lead you to success. If there is no plan, you have a certain level of inertia. You are unwilling to move because you don't necessarily know what the next step is, and you don't necessarily know what the relationship between what you're doing and your success is. Planning focuses your attention and gets you motivated, driven to actually do something. That's where the action orientation comes. No plan, then you're basically lazy. Think about a situation with some guys hanging around. They're hanging around on a Saturday afternoon, and you say, hey, who's doing what? Why are you not doing anything? Well, we don't really have a plan. One of the guys decides on a plan. Hey, we're going to go to the movie. We're going to go bowling. We're going to go grab something to eat. Then everybody kind of gets up and starts going. Why? They are now motivated because there is some plan to follow. They have a roadmap. That's the benefit of planning. Thirdly, improves coordination and control. Well, what do we mean by that? We said planning again is linked to the other phases in the management process. Planning leads directly into organization. When we have a plan, one, we know what we want to accomplish, but two, we know how we're going to accomplish it. The how incorporates all the parts that are necessary to accomplish the objectives. And therefore, we not only know what parts we need, but we also know how those parts should work together. So planning brings the efforts of all those different entities together so that they can be organized so that we can have an effective organization. Planning allows us to coordinate our efforts much more effectively. Think about when you are doing a group project and there are many of you in the group. Well, what you often do is at the beginning in your meetings, you create a plan. You devise a way that you're going to work in order to fulfill the objective. Let's say it's a presentation. You will decide that one person is going to do this, another person is going to focus on this, the other person is going to work on the PowerPoints, that person is going to get the supplies. And all of those people have efforts, but they know how their efforts are going to be brought together to have that final project completed at a certain time. So you have coordination, you know who has to do what, and you also know when they have to do it and how they will work together to get it accomplished. The other thing that planning does is it helps us in terms of control. Control is all about measuring and evaluating whether we're doing what we're supposed to be doing in the manner that we're supposed to be doing it. So we know through our plans what we want to achieve and how we should achieve it, and therefore we have some benchmark or some form of comparison, some point of comparison, I should say, to evaluate whether or not we are following the plan. Again, going back to the GPS, that is your benchmark. If you stray from that, you can or you will be told by the GPS to come back onto course. It allows the machine to control your behavior to some extent. And then the last thing about planning is that it improves time management. Okay? Oftentimes students say, I wasn't very disciplined in terms of my approach to the semester this year. I wasted time. Well, many times, or in many instances, the reason students waste time, and of course it happens in other areas, is that there is no plan. You have no plan. Many of you work or have other activities going on in your life. And so if you don't manage your time effectively, if you don't plan, if you don't determine what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, you can find yourself getting involved in wasteful efforts, spending too much time on frivolous, trivial things that are not adding value, and spending too little time on the things that are most important. So with effective time management, effective planning, it can help you to improve how you spend your time. You're going to spend your time on efforts that are part of your plans, and you're going to not spend time on things that are not related to your plan. You're going to be focused, as we said before. You're going to be driven. You're going to know exactly what needs to be done and control your behavior, discipline yourself in order to make your efforts be realized. So that's the benefits of planning. In the next brief lecture, I'm going to talk about different types of planning. And then in the third brief lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about goal setting and goal management.